which is an important aspect to consider when playing as a team. It is also a good idea to rush distortion enchantments on your boots to enable the flash pulverize combo that makes starting fights all the more easier. To end the video, I wanted to add some strong champions that I would encourage you to play when with your team. However, I would not consider. Hello everybody and welcome to Strategy, a YouTube series that is dedicated to helping teams climb the rank 5's ladder by improving their ability to work together, as well as providing them with methods that can help develop their thinking and playstyles. My name is Vedius, and today we're going to discuss the teamfight composition. We will look at what a teamfight composition typically consists of, the general win conditions associated with the team comp, and how to best create situations to achieve those win conditions. We will then look at some examples so that you may gain a better understanding of how great teamfight compositions can actually be. So, what is a teamfight composition? Well, if you haven't guessed already, it is a composition that is built around fighting the enemy team, typically in a 4 vs 4 or 5 vs 5 fashion. One of the most well-known examples of this is the Wombo combo. This is where multiple champions will have big area of effect abilities that can stack on top of each other and do insane amounts of burst damage to the entire enemy team in a short space of time. However, there are other ways to play teamfight compositions. You do not need a Wombo combo, you just need a composition made up of champions that, when they come together, are strong at teamfighting. To make a strong teamfight comp, you need a few things. The first is a reliable engage. There is no point building a teamfight composition if you have no way to start a teamfight. The engage is very important, and due to this, they will often have more than one source of engage to increase the number of ways to force fights. Out of the laning phase, then it will be harder to pick champions that are known for being strong and can synergize. Stackable abilities like a Wombo combo. What it means is that all of the champions have a Kogamore is a good example of all of the champions having a complementary focus because they are all trying to keep the Kog'Maw alive, knowing that the enemy frontline will be taken out before yours is. So now that we know what a teamfight composition is, let's look at what we need to do to win a game with one. Win conditions are what the team needs to do to win the game. In the case of a teamfight comp, they win by being able to have a strong control over objectives. Objectives such as Dragon, Baron, Blue, Red, and Towers are all points on the map that both teams will fight for. By having a teamfight composition, you naturally have the advantage in these fights due to the nature of your champions. There are two important things to remember while executing a teamfight composition. The first is you have to realize when you can and cannot fight. The great thing about these compositions is that no matter how far behind you are, if you can get the perfect fight, you can swing things back in your favour. However, the opposite is also true. Going for a fight that you have no chance of winning will just make your lives difficult. The best way to know if you can win a fight or not is to do one of the following. The first is to look at your items and the enemy's items, who has the bigger power spikes at that point in the game. Another is to have a look at your positioning. Can we afford to fight in this choke point, or do we need a more open area? Another is to check on your cooldowns. Do we have flash on our AD carry, and do they have flash on their AD carry? Being able to recognize these things will give you a big advantage over so many other teams on the ladder simply because they do not do it. Learning these basic things can significantly improve your gameplay. The second thing to realize is how well you can control the objective that you want to fight over with vision. Vision is extremely important when playing a teamfight composition simply because you want to know exactly where the enemy is coming from as you start the objective and the point at which is best for you to fight. The final thing to remember when executing a teamfight composition is to have a clear plan before starting the fight. It is important that every player understands their role in the teamfight before it happens, because teamfights are often quite scrappy and one person can't be responsible for controlling everybody's position. Clear calls and good plans result in success. Let's now take a look at some professional teams utilizing a well-executed teamfight with a teamfight composition. We're going to be looking at Game 5 between Korea's ESC EVER and China's QG Reapers in the final of the 2015 IEM Cologne. The team we're going to be concentrating on is EVER, so we're going to do a quick run through of what makes their composition good at teamfighting. The first is that they have a reliable engage in the form of Kalista and Alistair. The Fate's Call into the headbutt and pulverize combo makes for a very easy way for them to start any fight. The second is that all of the laners can handle themselves during the laning phase. Kalista has a lot of mobility, making it harder to gank her. She has an easy time farming and plenty of trade potential. Fiora is labelled as the duelist for a reason. Her ability to dominate is quite apparent given her kit, meaning that she can also hold her own during the laning phase. Ryze works quite nicely here because of how strong the other side lanes are. In this situation, jungle pressure has to be sent to those other side lanes because Ever naturally have the stronger champions, meaning Ryze can effectively get a free lane. The third is that the composition synergizes nicely. It is very easy to follow up on any engage due to the high mobility available on every champion target focused, meaning they find a target quickly. This is made easier by the displacement that comes from Alistar and the strong frontline presence that Dr. Mundo provides. Moving on to the actual fight, the first thing you'll notice is that Fiora has already been killed as a result of overextending and getting caught out. QG see this as an opportunity to start the Baron. Remember that I previously mentioned teamfight compositions are ideal for playing around objectives, and even with a numbers disadvantage, their composition still excels in this situation while moving into position. Then comes the engage from Alistar. This is a best case scenario where Alistar gets an engagement off without having to use the Fate's Call. This results in QG being stuck in the pit, taking free damage from Baron and finding some way to get rid of a tanky frontline. Kalista is now in a position to just start beating down onto QG, who is stuck between a rock and a hard place. They try to catch out Kalista, but thanks once again to the Alistar acting as a reliable frontline, they are unable to land any solid crowd control onto her, but force her back with the exhaust. Notice now that because Rek'Sai's flashed in to try and isolate Kalista, the composition of Ever can kick into effect of focusing down a single target. Even though Kalista falls, she was able to do her job because of two simple things. The first is that a huge number of resources were invested just to take her down. And the second is that she was still able to get a huge amount of damage down while the Ryze was completely unharmed. At this point, Ryze can start cleaning up the fight because of the immense single target damage he has, while Alistar and Mundo continue to act as a solid frontline and force QG to constantly play around them. This is a great team fight because every player executed what they needed to do to achieve their win conditions, and because of this they were able to pull it off in a 4 vs 5 scenario. This comes back to what I was talking about when it comes to communication. Teams at this level would likely understand what needs to be done without having to verbally express it beforehand. However, as a developing team, it will take you time to learn this, but with continuous practice, it will become second nature in no time. That concludes this episode of Strategy. If you have enjoyed and would like to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe and check out my other social media. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please leave them in the comment section below. With that, best of luck on the ladder and have a good one. Welcome everybody to Strategy, a YouTube series that is dedicated to helping teams climb the rank 5's ladder by improving their ability to work together, as well as providing them with methods that can develop their thinking and playstyles. My name is Vedius, and today's episode will concentrate on the drafting phase, more specifically the best strategies for deciding what champions to ban. This episode will aim to cover some basic ideas that you can use to help improve this very important stage of play, and will provide a basic building block for your team to develop from. When it comes to your bans, there are 3 basic methods that you can use. The first method is to ban out champions that are considered strong by the standards of the current meta. The second is to ban out champions that certain players are considered to be exceptionally good at. And the third method is to ban out champions that counter the specific composition that you are trying to run. Let's take a look at each one of these methods in a little bit more detail. Starting with method 1, banning out champions that are considered to be strong by the current meta. In today's meta, some prime examples of strong champions would be Gangplank and Mordekaiser. These champions are considered to be so good that they must be picked or banned in every single game. This method of simply banning the strongest champions can be applied to when you're attempting to climb the rank 5's ladder, as well as playing by yourself in solo queue. So, if you're struggling to know what to ban, taking away the strong meta champions is a good way to start. A slight adaptation of this method is to only ban a few of the strong meta champions. This creates a situation where both your team and the enemy team now have access to some of these strong meta picks. Therefore, you can effectively trade strong champions with the intention of picking the ones that you are more comfortable with. Let's now take a closer look at this method in action. This is the draft phase between SK Telecom and Edward Gaming during the World's group stages. What I first want to bring attention to is that the bans coming out from both sides are tailored towards taking away champions that are strong in the current meta. However, due to the large number of strong champions available, not every one of them can be banned. Therefore, what Edward Gaming decide to do is leave some of these strong champions open with the intention of trading strong picks for other strong picks. In this instance, Edward Gaming end up giving away Elise but get Callista in return. This is a very simple banning method and is often the most commonly used one that you will see in competitive play, on the rank 5's ladder, and in solo queue. Moving on to method 2, banning out champions that certain players are considered to be exceptionally good at. This method is most commonly used when you know the team that you're playing against. If you know that they have a comfort champion, you can deny that from them and then prepare for picks they are likely to move to next. Alternatively, if you can identify a particular player that may have somewhat of a small champion pool, you can concentrate your bans on that target to reduce the number of comfort champions that they have available to them. A good example of this can be seen in the TSM vs LGD Worlds group stage match. This time, notice how TSM banned champions towards a specific individual rather than banning strong meta champions. They have identified that LGD's jungler TBQ had been underperforming during the group stages so far and decided to target his jungle pool to try and deny him as many comfort picks as possible. By doing this, they increased the likelihood of him making a mistake during the game, as he is less likely to be playing on one of his comfort champions. They then follow this up with a target ban towards Imp. In this instance, they acknowledge his skill on the champion and don't want him to play it, so they take it away from him. This method is less applicable when climbing the 5's ladder, as you will often not know your opponents. However, it can still be useful when preparing for opponents at an online or offline event. Finally, let's run through method 3, banning out champions that counter the specific composition that you are trying to run. The best time to use this method is when you are planning to run a specific composition and understand some of the major weaknesses that could result in its downfall. By banning away champions that counter your composition, you can increase the likelihood of success. A possible risk of this though is that sometimes it can give away your strategy, as some people are familiar with how certain champions can counter certain compositions. It is also important to consider that this method will often leave a number of strong champions open. Therefore, you should make sure that your composition has some way of dealing with these potential picks that are likely to be chosen by your opponents. To illustrate this, let's take a look at a slightly older game between Enemy Esports and Team Solar Mid during Week 9 of the regular season over in North America. Team Solar Mid wanted to build a poke composition, mainly revolving around an AP Cogmore in the mid lane. They initially ban away the Rise, as it's a very strong pick during the meta at the time. They then follow this ban up with a Sivir ban. The reason for this is that it provides a hard engage which poke compositions often struggle to deal with. Team Solar Mid are also aware that split pushing is another effective strategy that can deal well with poke compositions, so they ban away the Fizz to reduce the number of split push options available to Enemy Esports, as well as allowing Dyrus some more flexibility in the top lane to run champions like the Maokai that would further support their planned composition. While this strategy is not as common in current competitive play, it can be used effectively if you and your team find a composition that works well and find fun to play. I've provided you with 3 simple banning strategies that any team could use that would help them improve. I would encourage you to play around with the different strategies and find which method works best for your team. If nothing else, the take-home message that I want to give you is that there should always be a reason for your bans. Banning Lux because you find her laugh annoying will not really help your team develop their drafting phase. By sticking to one of the previously mentioned strategies, your bans will always have a purpose, and your likelihood of success will therefore increase. However, this is only half the story. Be sure to check out the next episode of Strategy where I will cover the second half of the draft, the picking phase. That concludes this episode of Strategy. If you're interested, you can subscribe to this channel so that you are updated whenever a new episode is released. Before I go, I would like to give a very special thanks to my good friends Peter and Joe for their immense contribution to the creation of this series, as I honestly wouldn't have been able to do this without either one of them. I'd also like to thank you guys very much for taking the time out to watch this video, and I hope you found it useful. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please leave them in the comments section below. But until the next time, I wish you the very best of luck on the ladder, and have a good one.
Seis, dos, uno. Uff, joder. 0, 4, 2, 7.
Hello everybody and welcome to Strategy, a YouTube series that is dedicated to helping teams climb the rank 5's ladder. It aims to do this by improving their ability to work together, as well as providing them with methods that can help develop their thinking and playstyles. My name is Vedius, and today we are going to continue discussing the draft phase by looking at some methods behind how you should pick your compositions. If you didn't catch the last episode, be sure to click the link on your screen to go check it out. This episode is going to cover basic picking strategies that will be helpful to those struggling to know how to design strong and well-rounded compositions. If you're looking for something a little more in-depth, I would recommend you check out part 3 of this series, as it will be looking at the picking stage in a little bit more detail. Your picking phase can be divided into 2 separate parts, your early rotations and your later rotations. This may seem a little obvious at first, but let's take a closer look to understand what I mean. Starting with the early rotations. Here, you should aim to pick well-rounded champions that can fit into a number of compositions. By well-rounded, I mean champions that provide a wide array of options to your team. Things like wave clear, the ability to split push, or the ability to engage and disengage a team fight are all great examples of what a champion can offer their team. If a single champion can provide a number of these options, then it can be considered well-rounded. Often, you'll find that the strong meta champions are thought of as such because of how well-rounded they actually are. This is why picking them early is one commonly used method. But just because strong champions are available doesn't mean that you have to choose them. You and your team will have your own strong champions that you value and can be considered strong even if they aren't as meta. The reason behind picking these well-rounded champions early is largely due to 3 different things. The first is that it provides you with the ability to easily adapt to whatever happens throughout the rest of the draft. Secondly is that it allows your composition to be ambiguous, meaning that your opponents can't easily predict what you want to play. And thirdly is that it allows you to deny picks from your opponent that they may want to play themselves. Let's take a look at Game 1 of the PGL's European Qualifier final between Giants under Doges and Millennium. Starting with Giants, notice how they've made Kalista their first pick. She is considered to be a very well-rounded champion because she offers an engage, strong teamfight presence, decent wave clear later on into the game, and relevant at every stage of play. However, notice how many other strong champions are still available. Giants have decided to prioritize the Kalista over something like an Elise because they believe it to be more valuable to their playstyle and preferences. This is very important, as you and your team should always look to do the same thing. Over on the side of Millennium, they open things up with the Victor and the Gragas. Again, both very well-rounded champions due to the wide array of options that they can offer their team. Things such as the ability to wave clear, the ability to engage and disengage a team fight, as well as being relevant to every stage of play, are just a few examples of what these champions can offer. Notice that all of the picks so far are relatively ambiguous. Neither team is showing the composition that they are planning to run. It is also important to note once more that Millennium have chosen to value these picks over other strong picks, and this is because they are comfortable and versatile preference picks. Moving on to Giants' second rotation, they still maintain this idea of picking well-rounded champions, but now you can see a composition starting to be formed. Elise and Braum offer great pick potential, but do not determine the direction of the composition, so there is still room for adaptation. This, however, gives Millennium some information about Giants' composition that they can now respond to, which moves us nicely onto the second half of the picks. The later rotations are where your flexibility should come into effect. Most commonly, you will use these picks to further complement your composition, whether that be to make up for any potential weaknesses that the composition may suffer from, or whether that be to tunnel your composition into something slightly more specific. You can also use the later rotations to try and counter the composition that your opponent is trying to run. Be cautious of this though, as flex picks can often throw a spanner in the works, a topic which will be looked at in more detail in a later episode. To illustrate this, we're going to look at the second half of the draft phase between LGD Gaming and Origin during the World's group stages. What I want you to concentrate on is how LGD choose to tunnel their picks a little more by clearly showing their protect the AD carry composition with the Cogmore. This allows Origin to adapt their composition as their first two picks are relatively well rounded. One method of dealing with a composition that protects a single target is to build a composition that hits everything and everyone. Origin recognise this and pick up the Orianna and Annie, who provide a lot of area of effect damage. Now we move back to LGD, who have the choice of trying to complete their composition by providing more protection for their AD, or they can by choosing the Vi and slightly away orientated, where the Malphite and Vi act as a front line with the Cogmore providing consistent damage from the backline. By doing this, they now have options available to them for dealing with this counter composition that Origin have tried to build that was only a slight deviation from their original Protect the AD composition. Origin then close their draft out by doing something similar. They pick a champion that complements their overall area of effect combo composition, but have also created a situation where every single laner has a favourable matchup. This will make it easier for them to build an early lead and prevent Cogmore from becoming a lethal threat in the late game. This is an example of teams using these later rotations to adapt and change their plan to fit their composition, deal well with the enemy composition, and pick champions that they are comfortable on. This might seem like quite a lot of information, so I want to recommend that you use a checklist during your draft. Once you've completed your bans, creating a mental or physical checklist to remind yourself of everything that you need to do can make sure that you don't overlook anything significant. Take a look at this basic example checklist that you can use to start with. Number 1, are there any strong champions still available? Here, you should be thinking about whether you want to pick them for yourselves or if you have a potential counter for them in the event that your opponent decides to pick them. Number 2, what do we want to prioritize? Here, you should be thinking about what well-rounded champions that your team is comfortable on and develop from there. Number 3, now that we have our first champions, what composition do we want to run? Now, think about what the enemy has chosen, what possible compositions they could be trying to develop, and what possible compositions could work against that. And number 4, do we have any major weaknesses that we need to address? Things like wave clear, the ability to engage a fight. If your composition is lacking any of these, you should use this opportunity to try and round your composition out. This is just an example, and I would recommend you play around, create your own, and decide for yourself the most important things that you need to remember. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you what champions to pick, as it is largely down to your preferences and what is strong in the ever-changing meta. If, however, you use these basic ideas alongside your knowledge and understanding of the game, you will over time come to develop compositions that you enjoy and work for you. You may very well struggle at the start, but that's okay. Consistent practice will provide you with valuable experience that you can learn and develop from. Also, the best teams in the world often make drafting mistakes, so don't get too disheartened if it happens to you too. That concludes this episode of Strategy. If you've enjoyed and would like to keep up to date of any future videos, then feel free to subscribe or check out the other social media links available on your screen. If you have any suggestions for future videos or possible feedback, then please leave them in the comments section below. With that, best of luck on the ladder and have a good one. Hello everybody and welcome to Strategy, a YouTube series that is dedicated to helping teams climb the rank 5's ladder by improving their ability to work together, as well as providing them with the methods that can help develop their thinking and playstyles. My name is Vedius, and today we are going to discuss advanced picking methods to conclude this segment on the draft phase. The ideas that I will discuss are a development on part 2 of this series that focused on basic picking strategies. These more advanced ideas will be necessary when attempting to reach the higher levels of the rank 5's ladder. A link to the previous episode will be available if you haven't checked it out already. We're going to be looking at 6 different methods that can change up how you choose to play out your draft phase. These are the order in which you prioritize roles, the 4th, the lane swap, and the cheese pick. Some want to skip ahead, timestamps are available in the description below. Starting with the order. Often you will argue with your teammates about what role should actually be prioritized. In my previous teams, every player wanted to save their pick to be able to counterpick. Obviously, this is not possible. Therefore, I'll give you some general rules of thumb that you can use when deciding what to prioritize. The first rule of thumb is to pick up the strongest champion on the current patch, assuming you can play it. If you recall to earlier in Season 5, AP Ezreal became Flavor of the Month because of how insanely strong he was. Early rotating these champions regardless of role is often a good way to start. Assuming that there are no power picks available, securing strong or comfort non-solo laners is a great way to start your draft. The main reason for this is that your solo laners are a large contributor to the direction of your team composition. Therefore, saving them for as long as possible is the most ideal situation to result in the strongest possible draft. To illustrate how common this method is, I went through all of the games for Group B of the World's Group Stages and looked at what roles were prioritized and what roles were delayed. Of the 13 games that were played, jungle was the most common first pick. If it wasn't first pick, a power pick was prioritized, which, given the current patch, was usually Darius. The other thing to note is that mid and top were the most commonly chosen last picks for both sides. This is a clear illustration of how where you choose to prioritize roles is often an important thing to take into consideration during the draft. There were a few other interesting patterns, and I would recommend you check out the full breakdown that is available in the description below. Moving on to the 4th ban. This strategy will only work if you know the opponents that you are playing against, which you often won't when climbing the 5's ladder, but is still a useful strategy to know nonetheless. You may find that your opponents have too many threats that are worth banning away, but due to the number of bans you have, that might not be possible. To remedy this, you can ban the major threats while leaving one open to pick for yourself. Therefore, you effectively deny that champion from your opponent. There are many examples of players in competitive play being so renowned for their effectiveness at a champion that it is banned almost every game. Some notable names are Balls' Rumble, Peekaboo's Janna, and Bang's Kalista. Speaking of, take a look at the World Group Stage match between SK Telecom and Edward Gaming. Edward Gaming is still attempting to figure out the world's patch and decide to ban away both strong and well-rounded champions alongside a target ban towards Wolf's Alistar. They also recognise that, competitively, Bang is undefeated on Kalista at this point in time and do not want to give it to him. Therefore, they prioritise it over strong picks like the Rek'Sai and Darius because they believe taking that champion away from Bang is far more important. Up next is the flex pick. This is another common strategy that is seen regularly in competitive play. The general idea is that you pick a champion that can fill multiple roles. By doing this, it makes it harder for your opponent to figure out and adapt to your composition, thus allowing you to put that champion into the most advantageous position. A great example of flex picks being used can be shown in the Invictus Gaming vs AHQ game during the World's Group Stages. I want to draw your attention to IG's Shen pick. During this patch, Shen worked as both a top and a support. Because of the ambiguity that this pick brings, HQ decide to hold on to their top lane pick to get the counter pick. IG then follow this up with a Kennen pick, who can fill every role except for jungle. In this instance, HQ won't know for sure whether Kennen is support or top until the draft concludes. This leads them to choose a safe pick in Maokai, giving IG the advantage of a free lane for whichever champion they decide to run top. Our next strategy is the bait pick. This is almost the opposite of the 4th ban strategy in the sense that you want your opponents to pick a certain champion rather than picking it for yourself. You would typically do this when you have a comfortable niche strategy prepared to deal with that specific pick. One of the most famous examples of this is Faker's LeBlanc. Looking back at the mid-season invitational where SK Telecom and Edward Gaming met in the finals, we know that Faker was competitively undefeated on his LeBlanc, and it was considered mad to ever give it to him. Every game prior to this one, Edward Gaming had banned LeBlanc, but had left it available for this final game of the series. Faker takes it very early on into the rotations, which plays beautifully into Edward Gaming's plans. They build a composition with the sole intention of dealing with the LeBlanc pick. The Morgana mid lane typically provides LeBlanc with a difficult laning phase, due to constantly being shoved into tower, as well as the black shield to mitigate the single target damage. They also have a large amount of single target crowd control to lock her down in teamfights. Not only that, assuming that Faker can even get past the strong front line of Edward Gaming, he has to get through Evelyn's large shield and slow, the spell shield of Sivir, as well as the black shield provided by Morgana once again. This whole composition was designed with making Faker's life difficult in a rotation. Something that you always have to consider is the possibility of a lane swap. If you decide on a bot lane pair that is a weak laning phase but scales very well as the game progresses, you should results in it regardless of whether you or your opponents decide to go for a lane swap. To explain this a little more, I want to show you the Game 2 draft between AHQ and SK Telecom during the World's quarterfinals. In this situation, purely based on the matchups, AHQ should win the bot lane and SKT should win the top lane. This mismatch means that if either team decides to lane swap, they will be redistributing who they focus their golden experience onto. If a lane swap occurs, then the weaker lanes of both teams will get through the early game safer, and if no swap occurs, SKT will have a stronger top laner and AHQ a stronger AD carry. And so, this underlines the importance of SKT recognising during their draft that they have a weaker bottom lane, so they compensate with a winning top lane. Last but not least, the cheese phase. This method works wonders in solo queue if you can execute it properly. Cheesing involves picking a champion that is usually not seen in competitive play, but has a very unique niche that can heavily swing games in favour of your team. I would recommend that if you're going to cheese, that you save it for one of your later rotations, otherwise it can backfire quite heavily. To demonstrate this, let's take a look at the CLG vs KOO Worlds group stage match. In an attempt to take advantage of the low mobility Ashe pick made by KOO, CLG decide to opt into an uncommon Blitzcrank pick. They may have been able to make it work, but because they picked it so early on in the draft, it was very easy for KOO to respond with the Morgana. This champion completely denies the niche that Blitzcrank brings as long as she can black shield the correct target, which, at this level of play, Gorilla usually does. This resulted in Blitzcrank having little to no impact on the game, which significantly hurt CLG. As initially stated, these methods are an expansion of the previous strategy video focused on basic picking methods. I recommend that you experiment with each method if you're a developing team, but the important thing is to be aware of these strategies as many experienced teams will rely on these methods during the draft phase. That does conclude this 3-part series on the draft phase. If you've enjoyed and would like to keep up to date on any future videos, then feel free to subscribe or check out my other social media. If you have any suggestions for future videos or constructive feedback, please leave them in the comment section below. With that, best of luck on the ladder and have a good one.
No se me da bien dejar que me derroten.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Patch X. In this series, I cover topics that are relevant to Rank 5's teams and the competitive scene while still being useful for those that are interested in improving in solo queue. Today, we're going to be looking at the strongest and most contested picks for coordinated play coming into patch 6.1. We'll be looking at each lane in turn, so if you're only interested in a specific lane, then timestamps are provided in the description below. Starting with the top lane. Gangplank and Fiora are currently the most contested carry top laners. Gangplank not only has a global ultimate that provides a number of uses, he also has a fantastic build path that makes him viable in a number of compositions. Rushing Trinity Force provides him with a strong mid-game power spike, and he scales well by following with an Essence Reaver and Infinity Edge. Fiora's scaling is equally as potent, and is renowned for being able to 1v1 pretty much anyone with Black Cleaver and Ravenous Hydra. Mastery buffs will be coming into patch 6.1, which may result in these champions heading more towards the Ferocity tree, but will likely keep both of them high on the priority list. Next is Malphite. Mastery points into Resolve with Grasp of the Undying has improved his trading in lane, which, alongside his reliable engage, have put him in a good spot. Finally, Rise has risen in popularity since Faker showed the world what the Rogue Mage can do, and with Rod of Ages buffs and his ability to survive most lanes, he should be a highly considered pick going forward. Next up is the jungle. Lee Sin, Rek'Sai and Elise are likely considered to be the most valuable junglers coming into 6.1. Their ability to gank without the assistance of an improved smite, allowing them to build Tracker's Knife and command vision control in accordance with their early to mid game power spikes will make them exceptionally proficient on patch 6.1. Rivaling these three is Kindred. Alongside her fantastic kit, her ability to do percentage current health damage with her passive on each auto attack means she is a great duelist and does not require much gold to be relevant. Her ultimate Lamb's Respite is also a fantastic team fighting tool with limitless potential. The mid lane has seen notable item changes and cost increases, which has led to Rod of Ages and Abyssal Scepter champions rising to power. Additionally, Frost Queen's Claim has proven to be an effective replacement to Morellonomicon, ensuring champions who are reliant on cooldown reduction are still relevant. While small changes will be made to Frost Queens on patch 6.1, it will likely continue to be prevalent coming into the new season. As a result of this, the mid lane has a wider pool to choose from, making it unlikely that certain champions will be highly sought after, but rather, mid lane champions will be traded based on preference. Here are some of the mid laners that you are likely to see coming into patch 6.1. The most contested AD carries are likely to be Lucian and Tristana. Misfortune is highly valued on patch 5.24, but due to the buffs that we will see across the board for masteries, combined with the nerf to the Make It Rain's base damage, may result in her becoming less of a priority pick, as newer ADs can better utilise the stronger masteries. She still does however possess high attack damage ratios. Rushing Essence Reaver gives her an